Hi, it's me, and welcome back to another new target extraction overview for Limbus Company. Today's target extraction has only a single new 3-star ID tied to Season 5 in the Priest of La Mancha land Gregor, his first true tank ID outside of Spy Gregor. This is another Bloodfiend ID similar to Barber Otis, and as a result relies heavily on Bleed and Blood Feast in order to perform well. That said, he has quite a few things that Otis lacks, like actually being able to contribute to Blood Feast by a lot, and having the new highest max HP of any ID in the game, beating out the trio of N-Corp Merceau, K-Corp Honglu, and Pequod Heathcliff. Despite being a tank, the majority of damage he takes is probably going to be from himself, but before going any further, let's jump into his new effects so we know exactly what kind of ID we're dealing with. Bloodied Hand is his first new status effect, and it mirrors Blood-Tinged Scissor Blades, but has no downside at stage 2. Once you reach 10 or more, you start to gain 1 offense level up each turn for every 5 Bloodied Hand you have. Once you reach 20 or more, you will additionally inflict 1 bleed and 1 rupture with each hit. Unlike Blood-Tinged Scissor Blades, it's actually a lot harder to generate with his available skill set. Regardless, you will gain it passively over time, and eventually you will receive a payoff for it, and that payoff is really solid even if you just hold on to it. Gregor's other new mechanic is found in his custom status effect, Ailing Heart. This status starts at 0 at the beginning of battle and increases by 1 at the end of every turn, up to a maximum of 10 total. For every 3 Ailing Heart that Gregor has, he gains 1 defense level up at turn start, plus an additional 1 for every 3 when below 50% HP. Additionally, when below 40% HP, he will heal HP equal to 5 times his Ailing Heart percent of his max HP, up to 30 HP total per skill every time he lands a hit. Contrary to what you might think considering his high HP, he absolutely needs to have this HP healing in order to function as an ID, and thankfully, it isn't hard to attain enough healing. Ailing Heart gain can be accelerated by using his defense skill, a 15 to 20 rolling Lust Guard skill that gives 3 Ailing Heart once per turn. It also reveals why Priest Gregor needs all the healing that he can get. He contributes to Blood Feast by dealing massive amounts of bleed damage to himself with his own skills. When above 40% HP, not only does he gain 5 bleed, he also triggers bleed up to 3 times on himself, which during a long fight could result in a lot of damage. Thankfully, he doesn't do this when below 40%, opting instead to consume up to 20 Blood Feast to heal up to 20 HP, which is actually a lot less useful in the long run. Once his passive, Self-Destructive Dedication, is fueled, he grants passive SP regeneration to your lowest SP unit in reverse proportion to your Ailing Heart, so fueling the passive early will give you the most benefit with it. In addition to that effect, he also has what is essentially just Unrelenting again, preventing death for a turn should he take lethal damage once per encounter. This effect on Blade Lineage Merceau wasn't really that important, but just playing casually with Priest Gregor, you should see this effect activate with relative frequency due to how, well, self-destructive this ID actually is. Sacrifice for the Family is a 3 to 11 rolling blunt gluttony skill with 2 coins that can roll up to a 3 to 15 if the target has enough bleed. The fact that using the skill at full HP forces Gregor to take 25 bleed damage is going to automatically give 25 Blood Feasts to your team, which is far more guaranteed Blood Feasts than you could get prior to this ID's release. I said earlier that Bloodied Hand is harder to get than Blood-Tinged Scissor Blades, and that's because it relies on Gregor's skills hitting far more than Otis's do. His skill 1 also can't generate it on use, meaning he's going to take a little longer to wind up, which is your trade-off for the high Blood Feast generation. Suffocating Guilt is a 4 to 16 rolling blunt pride skill with 2 coins that can become a 4 to 20 if the target has enough bleed. This skill also gives Gregor 20 bleed when used with less than 5 Ailing Heart, but also gains 3 additional Bloodied Hand on use if you don't have those 5 Ailing Heart. He can gain up to 10 Bloodied Hand when above 5 Ailing Heart by consuming Blood Feast, but this isn't likely to happen until much later into a battle. The other thing that Priest Gregor does that is really needed in the Bleed archetype is inflicting bleed count, like, at all, something that Barber Otis almost did none of. One other thing that you'll notice is that he inflicts a small amount of Rupture on his skills, but this is ultimately not that important until you look at his Sin Affinities, which actually fit really well into Rupture. I would have liked for his aggro gain on skill 2 to be a bit higher, but I suppose he can't have everything. The Unforgivable Sin is a 5 to 17 rolling blunt lust skill with 3 coins that can become a 5 to 20 if the enemy has 6 or more bleed. The combined hits of this skill are able to heal up to 100 HP based on half the damage it deals, and his damage increases with lower HP, making this skill fairly strong in terms of overall DPS. It also inflicts bleed and rupture count, gives him the least bleed out of all of his own skills, and actually gives a little bit of bloodied hand on hit. Just like Otis, this skill improves by consuming your bloodied hand in multiples of 10, healing HP equal to triple the amount consumed, up to 60 HP, gaining 1 coin power at 10 consumed, and reusing the final coin if the skill is used at the maximum of 30 bloodied hand. That final coin reuse is actually really hard to get to, especially in focused fights where getting the necessary amount of bloodied hand is going to take a while. But even without that, the skill does a ridiculous amount of damage and healing, and should always be a reliable skill as a result. Lastly, his support passive is pretty solid when it comes to providing healing, something that's common on Gregor support passives to be fair. While not as guaranteed as Chef Gregor's support passive, it does have a maximum potential of over triple the amount of healing as long as the target has bleed, so it's definitely a pretty good support passive overall. This Gregor doesn't fuel any of his own ego perfectly, however he does have a few things going for him in terms of ego usage. Firstly, Leisure Domain's passive allows him to more consistently inflict a bleed count thanks to the maggot's infliction through its passive. All you need is an ally to use 1 sloth skill and you're ready to go, since Gluttony is really easy to get with this ID. In the same vein, Lantern is very cheap healing, and while he has a good amount of healing in his kit already, he tends to get staggered very early on, and additional healing is very appreciated as a result. The other thing this Gregor ID provides is being the first Gregor ID who can even somewhat consistently use Garden of Thorns to its full potential. A good bleed team nowadays can usually generate every resource, with only 1 or 2 being difficult to build up, those 2 usually being Sloth or Gloom depending on who you bring in your team. And since every bleed ID for the most part has a Lust skill, getting that 6 Lust Resonance isn't unreasonable once the ego actually has been fueled. That said, it is way too expensive for what it does, and trying to make full use of it is still questionable at best, in my opinion. Priest Gregor really thrives in a bleed team in order to take most advantage of consuming Blood Feast, primarily as a way to make other Bloodfiend IDs consume more Blood Feast. Currently that's just Barber Otis, who does happen to be a really strong partner for this ID, though if you don't have her, Ring Otis does just as well, if not better, when it comes to raw damage and bleed count output. Like all bleed teams, Ring Yi Sang and N-Corp Faust are both fantastic IDs for support purposes as well as for damage, and should never be discounted. Having access to healing ego like Fluid Sac also helps to offset the high damage that Gregor causes himself. Ring Yi Sang is also the only bleed ID who really generates Sloth that you would also consider in this team. Rhino Merceau and Spider Skull Ryoshu are also your best options for generating Gloom in a bleed team other than Ring Yi Sang, and are both very strong IDs in their own right. Ryoshu specifically gets a recommendation thanks to her providing healing to Gregor as well. Hook Honglu is also always good in a bleed team due to his high damage and high overall bleed infliction. I'd also like to recommend N-Corp Merceau for the first time ever, but only if you really want to be using Garden of Thorns. Out of every bleed ID, he's the only one who can generate Sloth rather frequently, so he helps out Gregor for generating his ego quite a bit. That said, any ID with Sloth could be added to the team even if they aren't directly bleed related, and you could end up with the same result. Lastly, support passives that heal are pretty rare on characters other than Gregor, but there are a couple noteworthy ones. Chef Ryoshu giving HP on kill will almost always heal Gregor thanks to how much damage he'll be taking. Lantern Don Quixote will always target Gregor if you don't have any other ID with aggro, which unfortunately means you'd have to leave Rhino Merceau behind. And K-Corp Honglu's K-Corp Ampules are really nice for Gregor as long as you remember not to activate the passive more than a single time. And that's about all I have to say about the Priest of La Mancha Land Gregor. If you want to test him out before extracting him, I have him at level 50 with what I believe are the most useful of his ego equipped, with everything at Uptie Threadspin 4, so feel free to add me to test him out. If you liked the video, you should like and subscribe. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.